So next, we're going to hear from our presentation on New Jersey truck parking profile. We're going to hear from all four presenters first and hold our questions till the end. Like I said before, Jacob will be monitoring the chat box. So feel free to enter questions throughout the presentations there, and then we'll get to them at the end. So this afternoon, our first speaker is Jan. I'm going to introduce all the speakers and then turn it over. Our first speaker is Janice Marino Doyle. Janice has been a program specialist in the Office of Freight Planning at NJDOT since 2022 and has spent her career in both the public and private sectors. She has diversified experience in strategic planning, business development, organizational productivity, forecasting, and program development. Then up will be our next speaker, Bridget Weigart. Bridget is a project manager in WSP's freight and logistics practice. She has over 35 years of experience in the planning and development of complex infrastructure projects. Bridget started her career at the New York City Economic Development Corporation. Then next we have Shashank Pulakanti. He will be following Bridget. He's a lead consultant within the freight and logistics practice at WSP and has been working with the public agencies in the U.S. for a number of years to understand freight patterns and flows across the nation. And the last speaker will be Steve Chiramonte. Steve is a director of transportation planning with nearly 25 years experience at WSP, including management or support of freight plans for state DOTs and MPOs throughout the region and nationally. He's been managing NJDOT state freight planning program for more than a decade, including the department's last 3 statewide transportation plans, as well as numerous additional freight-focused efforts that aim to support the state's good movement industry. All right, so with that, Janice, would you please get us started?
Sure, thank you, Stephen. So today we're going to be talking about our recent study on the New Jersey truck parking. We're going to give you some briefings and about the needs and the potential strategies. Next slide, please. So just to give you a basic overview of, we broke down our truck parking study into 2 phases, and the first phase basically is very important because it gathered all the information, and we did, as you can see from our timeline, we spent over a year going over different things such as literature and the systems, and we did a lot of interviews and surveys. And because we all know the purpose and the reasoning, how complex and important truck parking is to New Jersey and to the country. So we wanted to make sure that we gathered all that information. And we looked at, the shortages and the inefficient locations that the trucks are parking. And we identified some qualitative and quantitative analysis, right? So we're going to talk a lot about that. And we're going to understand the operational deficiencies of the current truck parking on our locations, and we're developing a framework for what we're doing. So we're gonna basically focus on the needs identification and the policies and strategies. Next slide, please. So we have the basic understanding of why we need to prioritize certain locations, what we found when we did our surveys and analysis. We built systematically a score system to analyze things and make it, give it weight and understanding. And we built on those results to come up with a performance analysis that the consultant team will talk more about. And then we're going to go into the potential policies and strategies that we can obtain from all this information and what we can do, because the objective is to follow it through to part 2 and really put some parking spaces out there where they're most needed, and be able to give the most important parking spaces to where the need is the greatest. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to WSP and Shashank. Thank you. Next slide, please.
Hey, good morning, guys. So we're starting with talking about the needs identification step of the previous slide, where we're looking at all of the freight corridors in New Jersey and trying to understand what the truck parking need as it currently exists is. So now truck parking need is pretty complex. There are some direct indicators like looking at specific parking facilities that are on these corridors and understanding what the demand is at each of those locations. but also there are other indirect indicators. Undesignated parking along the corridors, crashes arising from undesignated corridors, what truck drivers are telling us from surveys, etc. And so I'll be discussing all of these in the next few slides. On this slide, we're just kind of overviewing that we're covering all of the freight corridors in New Jersey. We've broken up those corridors into segments that are about 5 to 20 miles long because we really want to understand. We want to pinpoint really where truck parking demand and needs are the greatest. So generally, these the study area is broken out into these segments where the segments breakpoints are essentially areas that we deem are probably places where truck parking demand is likely to change. So if there's an interchange between two major corridors, past those interchanges, there might be a difference in truck parking needs. So that would be sort of a breakpoint for where we would introduce a new segment to study. Ultimately, we will compare all these segments against each other and rank segments relative to each other to understand where parking need is the greatest. And all of the parking facilities that exist in New Jersey are joined to at least one of these segments. That way we understand if we can pull in info directly from parking facilities on supply and demand, that's a direct indicator and would give us a good weight on what parking need is for that specific segment. Next slide, please. So to help with this, we first we had an inventory task last year where we pulled all rest areas and private truck stops in New Jersey, took account of how many spaces there are essentially, and so we're using that data to understand shortfall of spaces. And the image on the right shows you where truck parking spaces are available in New Jersey. So we have, on important freight corridors like 95, quite a few number of spaces, 78 and 80, I-78 and I-80 going to Pennsylvania, also having quite a few number of spaces. And all of these are important freight corridors, which is why we have parking facilities there. But really the question is, are the number of spaces available there sufficient for current demand and then future demand? But this data is incorporated in our needs analysis. Next slide, please. We also conducted a survey of truck drivers in New Jersey. So that involved looking at what long haul and short haul drivers. We had in total about over 500 responses. We asked them questions on where they find parking needs to be the highest, where would they see instances of illegal parking or undesignated parking, where they would like to see improved amenities, and a whole host of other questions that will be incorporated and I'll discuss in the next few slides. Next slide, please. So in those surveys, we found that over 70% of long haul respondents spend more than 30 minutes searching for parking. 60% of them say they generally find no parking available where they want them to be, so they have to take detours. A lot of them have to park outside of New Jersey for that reason. And almost 90% say they take a detour of over 5 miles to find parking when they need to find parking, generally due to HOS regulations, but it could also be first and last mile staging parking as needed. Overall, 96% of respondents said availability of overnight parking, which is generally HOS related, is either poor or very poor in New Jersey. So the survey seems to indicate that we do not have enough truck parking spaces relative to demand in New Jersey. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned earlier, we had a whole host of info collected over the course of this truck parking study. In this task, we were kind of amalgamating all of this together to come up with a composite need score to understand for each of those segments that we define, what is the truck parking need and how does that compare to the state score. So to help with this, we looked at direct indicators, as I mentioned, which is just direct availability of spaces at existing parking facilities in New Jersey. So parking facilities have a set number of, a set capacity of spaces that they have, and then we are estimating demand based on truck GPS data. So availability is essentially demand minus supply. So what is the shortfall of spaces, or at peak midnight parking, at peak midnight when parking demand is the greatest. So we in our system performance task, which is task 5, we used Attree GPS data to understand what truck parking demand was at peak midnight times at existing facilities. So we developed an availability score. We also developed a percent utilization score for peak midnight. So if a parking facility had, let's say, 100 spaces and only 90 of them were utilized at any given time, at peak midnight, their percent utilization would be 90%. Those are direct indicators which would tell us, is a parking facility oversupplied, undersupplied, or well supplied? We also estimated the availability of spaces in the future, where our forecast year is 2050. So based on our analysis, we know what the availability of spaces is at any particular facility currently, which is 2024 data. We applied truck volume growth factors from FAF, the Freight Analysis Framework, to understand what the availability of spaces would be in 2050. We want to build for future demand, not just existing demand. So it's important to understand what the shortfall of spaces will be in the future. Using the same Attree GPS data, we also estimated undesignated parking in task 5 across New Jersey corridors. Undesignated parking is an indirect indicator of demand. Mostly truck drivers are parking in places where they shouldn't park because they couldn't find sufficient parking where they're needed. So we incorporated our analysis on undesignated parking as well in developing these need scores. We spoke about survey results previously. So what truck drivers are saying about where spaces are undersupplied, where they see highest number of undesignated parking. We've incorporated those too, as well as info taken from that truck GPS data on how much of a detour truck drivers are taking to find parking. That's added cost to truck drivers. It increases costs of instances of crashes. It increases deterioration of payment. All of these are related to vehicle miles traveled increasing because truck drivers cannot find parking where they are. So we do want to minimize that, and that is an indicator of demand as well. We also analyzed crash costs from using New Jersey state data to understand what the magnitude of crashes are due to parked trucks. So specifically trucks that are in undesignated parking locations and leading to crashes that should be and could be avoided. Finally, we also looked at truck volume. That's to understand generally where truck volume is highest across corridors in the state. It's an indicator of current demand, but it could also show us future demand. Truck volume ultimately is the one that will drive truck parking demand growth. Next slide, please. Without going into too much detail on the weighting of all of these criteria that I just described, we mostly allocated a lot of points to direct indicators of demand, which are availability of spaces and percent utilization, both currently and in the future. We also assigned a good weight to undesignated parking and park crash costs. These are things that have high societal impacts, mostly safety related, but also deterioration of infrastructure costs and a few others. So we decided to weight those metrics highly too. Overall, the job of this is to combine all of these metrics, come up with a composite needs score, and then compare each segment against other segments in the state. Again, putting a lot more weight on direct indicators of demand, a little bit less on indirect indicators, but we're still valuing survey driver responses as well, just not as highly as direct indicators of demand. Next slide, please. So on the right, this is where we are displaying our results. On the right is a map of those same segments that I defined earlier, just scored by the truck parking need. So segments that are scored in thick red lines are where the truck parking composite need is the highest. Again, I'll remind you, these segments are just being compared against each other in New Jersey. So there are a few interesting observations. Major freight corridors like 95 have many segments that are highly ranked in terms of composite need. And so it's particularly along the Joyce-Kilmer area in central Jersey. Those are some of the highest ranking segments in the entire state. But also like to draw your attention to Western New Jersey, so segments of I-78 and I-80 to the west, where truck parking needs are very high. These are driven both by low availability of parking as well as high instances of undesignated parking. Further in urban New York, the northern New Jersey region, we see a cluster of high scoring segments on I-95 as well as I-80. These segments are scoring very highly, even though we don't have that much info on direct indicators of demand like parking facility utilization, because many of these segments do not have any parking facilities available. So despite not having that big contributor of scoring, they still rank highly in the state. So these segments definitely need to be looked at more closely, and I'll discuss that in a slide or two. Overall, also near Philadelphia, I-295 scores pretty highly, again, mostly due to undesignated parking and direct indicator of low availability at parking facilities along those segments. Any questions so far? I think actually we decided that questions will be to the end, so I'll just move on to the next slide. On this slide, we're showing that availability score that we discussed, direct indicator of demand. Both on the left is the current parking availability score, and then on the right is the future predicted score. So again, at the moment, I-95 is already undersupplied, so the demand is already much higher than the existing supply of spaces. Other important corridors like 78 are also undersupplied, just not as badly as I-95. But by 2050, most of the segments, especially in the critical freight corridors like 95, 78, and 80, are going to be undersupplied by more than 20 spaces every night. And a lot of these extend well beyond more than 20 spaces. It's go over 80, 100, and I'll describe some of those numbers later too. Next slide, please. So this is where I'll describe it. So looking at the table on the top, we're describing how many facilities are over capacity and what the shortfall of spaces is at those over capacity facilities. So for our current base year, which is 2024, based on Atri truck GPS data at those facilities, we're finding that 35% of facilities are over capacity with a net number of 207 space shortfall at those overcapacity facilities. We've come across interesting research recently that shows that you don't really need a facility to be at 100% utilization for it to be overcapacity. Truck drivers, as a specific facility reaches even 90-95% utilization, it is just annoying enough for drivers to get into the facility and find that one open space that they decide, it's not worth the effort, and they'll just park on the ramp outside of the facility, which is undesignated parking. So with that in mind, we did a sensitivity analysis. If we assumed the facility was at capacity, if it only had 95% utilization, actually, almost 43% of facilities are over capacity currently, and the shortfall of spaces at those facilities is about 270 spaces. By 2050, because of truck volume growth on all corridors in New Jersey, accounted for almost 70% growth between 2024 and 2050. The number of facilities the percentage of facilities that are over capacity is over 85%. So from 35% to 85% purely due to truck volume growth. And the shortfall of spaces at those facilities grows quite a bit to 1,700 to 1,800 spaces. And this is because there are a lot of facilities that right now are not, over capacity, but due to truck volume growth, a lot of those facilities will go over that 100% utilization limit. I want to point out one thing about this analysis. This analysis was completed using truck GPS data from Atri. So we're looking at what parking behavior is right now at these facilities. We did an inventory of spaces at those facilities, and we developed a shortfall number based on the demand we're seeing based on GPS data, and comparing that against the number of spaces available. This contrasts with the FHWA truck parking estimation formula, which looks at corridor level or statewide, study level approaches, which essentially calculates, it's essentially based on, total number of vehicle miles traveled by truck drivers, and then understanding, when do they need to take breaks, and estimating demand basically on VMT, as well as, based on regulations, they can't drive more than 8 hours or 30 minutes, right? And demanding corridors, like estimating corridor level demand. So it's not at specific facilities, it's at corridor level demand. So this is a different approach that we're using. And we're looking at facilities, overcapacity facilities only. Next slide, please. Here I'm displaying some data around the undesignated parking results that we had analyzed and estimated. So I'll talk about the image on the left first, which is, again, just a distribution of where we found undesignated truck parking clusters in New Jersey. Again, this is based on AdriTruck GPS data. We looked at roadways along New Jersey and found, where truck drivers are parking in non-designated facilities along the roadway. So this would be ramps or shoulders. And, there's actually quite a few of these instances that I found. I went and manually validated many of these instances and found on Google Street View trucks parking on ramps and shoulders. The biggest cluster of undesignated truck parking we found was actually in Western New Jersey on I-78. This is near the Bloomsbury rest areas. While we don't know exactly why this is occurring, one reason could be truck drivers that are kind of positioning themselves to go into warehouses and fulfillment centers in Allentown or in the Lehigh Valley in Pennsylvania, or coming in the opposite direction, coming from Allentown in Pennsylvania, parking around the Bloomsbury rest areas to move into the New York region the next day. So big clusters on I-78, some other big clusters also on I-95 near the Joyce-Kilmer area, as well as in the northern New Jersey region, where there aren't many parking facilities. We also found many instances of truck parking. On the right, we're actually displaying kind of images of those undesignated truck parking clusters. So the image on the top right is that Bloomsbury rest area cluster. You can kind of make out how there are many GPS hits of truck drivers parking on ramps and shoulders near the Bloomsbury rest areas. The lower image is similar. It's undesignated truck parking clusters on the Vince Lombardi service areas on I-95. So we've estimated all of these undesignated parking clusters. We kind of analyzed how many hours of undesignated parking there are at these clusters, and that number directly feeds into the need score that I displayed earlier. Next slide, please. The other important variable in our needs analysis was truck parking associated crashes, generally associated with undesignated truck parking. I'll direct your attention to the table on the right, where we have a row called highway. So these are crashes that are on highway involving parked trucks only. And these are parked trucks coming out of parking, staying as a parked truck, or while parking, essentially on ramps or on shoulders. We found, based on analysis of New Jersey Safety Voyager data over 5 years, annually we're seeing about 177 crashes associated with parked trucks on highways in New Jersey, costing about $61 million per year when we monetized it using US DOT guidance. So pretty significant numbers, and again, this directly feeds into our needs analysis. We see concentrations of these crashes again in that undesignated parking cluster on I-78, but also quite a bit in urban New Jersey in the north, where space is limited and the geometrics are much tougher. But generally we notice that wherever undesignated parking rises, truck parking associated crashes also rises. So this is a problem that has significant impacts. Next slide, please. Overall, looking at detours that truck drivers have to take, as well as the cost of these truck parking associated crashes, insufficient truck parking is costing almost 93 million annually in New Jersey. Next slide, please. After running our composite analysis score, we kind of looked at each of these important freight corridors, top ranking freight corridors, and to try to understand where need is the highest. So on the right, we have a strip map. The way this map works is we've broken out I-95 in New Jersey into 8 segments, left to right, and we ranked them based on each of the needs metrics that are used in our composite needs analysis. Segments that are marked green just have a low need for that specific metric, medium need if it's in orange, and high need if it's in red. So looking at I-95-3 in the image, which is essentially the stretch of I-95 in Mercer County and Middlesex County, it's close to the 287 interchange. That ranks pretty poorly across a number of metrics, but most importantly along direct indicators such as availability of spaces at existing facilities. 95 near the I-80 interchange, which is I-95-7, also ranks poorly for these segments. Truck volumes are very high throughout the corridor, which is not surprising, but crash costs kind of peak for I-95 east of the 287 north of the 287 interchange. Next slide, please. Similarly for I-78, which is another important corridor, it's that west, again, going from west to east here. I-78-1 is the westernmost segment of I-78 in New Jersey. So that segment really near Pennsylvania scores poorly across multiple metrics, mostly availability of spaces. And that, by the way, this specific segment, the truck parking demand is expected to grow quite a bit by 2050. So even though currently it's scoring it as medium need based on availability of spaces, by 2050 it goes deeply red. And kind of this metric, this graphic is actually understating how much need will show up in I-78 in the future in those western segments. Next slide, please. So we've kind of developed this composite score around need. It's important to understand where the needs are peaking in New Jersey because we need to craft the right policies to address those needs. Preliminarily, we're kind of developing our strategies and purposes across 5 different categories. So the first one is data and technology. This is essentially real-time availability systems, which is primarily used to increase the utilization of spaces that currently exist. So making sure that drivers know where truck parking spaces are and how many are available at any given time, just so that spaces don't go to waste. Oftentimes, drivers might park on the side of the road because they don't know that spaces are available just nearby. So we want to make sure that drivers are aware of where the spaces are. So that's what data and technology will address. Then it's the straightforward strategy of increasing capacity of spaces through the public sector. So any kind of project that is agency-led, New Jersey DOT or any other public agency, and publicly funded. So direct capacity expansion. The third one is public-private partnerships, which is trying to leverage private partners to exist to improve either whether it's utilization or increasing the capacity of spaces. A variety of things are discussed in this strategy. Policies and regulations, making sure that where space is available, truck parking supply is present. So if there's publicly available land which can be repurposed to improve the capacity of parking spaces in the state, that will be discussed in this strategy. And finally, institutional actions and outreach, just making sure that agencies are organized and ensuring that truck parking is a priority, and making sure any project implementations are both stay on track and are followed through to the end. So, best practices around that are highlighted in this strategy. Next slide, please. So I'll talk about data and technology measures, and then I'll turn it over to Bridget. So as I mentioned, in data and technology, we're mostly discussing real-time availability systems. It has essentially two sides. One is trying to assess what the actual availability is, so technology around assessing the availability at any given time. And the second is disseminating that info to truck drivers where they see it. So there's also some technologies around implementing parking reservation system or using this data to plan where parking capacity should be improved. But those will be discussed, but primarily this is around real-time availability systems. Next slide, please. So as part of these systems, as I mentioned, there are two things: availability detection. Primarily, the types of technologies that are used here are in-pavement sensors. So sensors that are embedded into the ground that look at any given space to see if a truck exists on it, and whether it exists or not, and then it just counts it. Counts it how many spaces have trucks on them. Video systems or gate count in, count out systems. Essentially, at entry and exit points of any parking facility, trying to understand, just counting the number of trucks coming in and trucks going out, comparing that against the number of spaces, and then coming up with an availability figure. Most of these systems should be augmented by a CCTV camera system. Most of these sensors can sometimes malfunction. So what we've noticed, particularly with best practices, is having a CCTV camera system that calibrates, that first of all monitors, and you can look at what your cameras are saying for specific instances of time, compare that against what your sensors are saying, and make sure that your sensors are calibrated and making sure that they're working well. That's a best practice that I'll discuss later. On the information dissemination side, generally with real-time parking availability, we've noticed uses of 511 systems, smartphone apps, and dynamic messaging signs, but there are also static signs and visor cards that can be distributed. Next slide, please. Probably the foremost example of real-time availability system implementation in the US is the MASTO TPIM system, which is the Truck Parking Information Management System. MASTO is the Mid-America Association of State Transportation Officials, essentially a group of state DOTs. I've listed the states here. They've come together. I think this project, real-time availability project, started in 2015 with what was then called the Tiger Grant. So across all major interstate corridors and some US routes too, in those states, each state established a real-time availability system and then connected them together for the master system, because truck drivers don't just use real-time availability systems in any one state. They use that across their journey, and when they traverse across multiple states, it makes sense that they're using the same system throughout. Essentially, they utilize, again, those vehicle detection systems that I described, whether it's each state had their own implementation. So whether it's a gate count-in, count-out system or an in-pavement sensor, all of them were augmented with a CCTV camera system. And generally, what we've seen across these states is they disseminate this information using 511 websites that they put online. And that has kind of their latest available info on truck parking, both across public rest areas as well as private truck stops throughout those states. Next slide, please. New Jersey DOT actually has also had a pilot as of 2024. This was at 2 rest areas in the state, the Harding Rest Area and the Deepwater Rest Area. There were traffic micro sensors installed in pavement, and so that kind of was the primary method of detecting how many spaces were actually occupied at any given time. But the whole system was also, again, augmented by CCTV cameras that calibrated those sensors and made sure they were working correctly. Since it was a pilot, the availability data was not transmitted to truck drivers. However, there was a web portal created internally that detailed that real-time utilization. So it highlighted number of trucks that are entering or exiting the facility, what the average amount of time a truck spent at any given space, and how many spaces were utilized at these 2 rest areas. Next slide, please. Overall, for this kind of real-time availability systems, at this point in time, started in like 2015 in the US, there are many examples now of states and agencies implementing these real-time availability systems. So I've listed some examples: California, Colorado, so along corridors, and the I-10 Corridor Coalition is a good example. And there was also a recent NCHRP as of 2024 that detailed the best practices in developing these real-time availability systems. So that's NCHRP 1137, provides good guidance and best practices to DOTs and agencies when they're technically trying to technical guidance around implementing these truck parking availability systems. And then I want to highlight one kind of evaluation of these implementations and what they found, interesting observations that they found. This is from Iowa. They developed a truck parking information system as part of MASTO's larger system that I described earlier. So what they found is that implementing this real-time availability system reduced both increased the average utilization of spaces in truck parking facilities in Iowa, but it also reduced the variability in utilization. So these parking facilities were more consistently utilized. There weren't like peaks and troughs in when spaces were available and not. So overall, more consistency. Drivers were more aware of where parking facilities are, how many spaces were available. Iowa didn't implement variable message signs, so these are essentially signs on highways showing spaces at specific rest areas. They simply transmitted their info via 511 websites as well as smartphone apps, and they found that they achieved similar utilization improvements compared to other states in MASTO. So it might be that variable message signs don't add as much value relative to their costs. And finally, they definitely highlighted the importance of having a CCTV or video camera system to look for alerts or discrepancies between sensor counts and those surveillance cameras. Again, sensors are prone to malfunctioning. These surveillance camera systems make sure that you're aware of any issues with your sensors and that you calibrate your sensors to make sure that they're providing accurate data. So they definitely recommended always installing an additional surveillance camera system to augment your base sensors that you use for utilization. I think that covers data and technology, and I believe the next slide is public capacity expansion. This is where I turn it over to Bridget.
Thanks, Shashank. So as Shashank had mentioned, because of the really severe need that we found in New Jersey, we did look at a whole range of potential strategies and solutions in terms of public capacity expansion that is traditionally, often used. The variety of solutions include expanding existing rest areas at areas of need where there's capacity or right-of-way available. Also expanding the number of truck parking spaces at existing rest areas just through improving the geometrics, the design within the facility, or building a new dedicated truck parking facility in highway right-of-way or on other publicly owned property near shippers and receivers. And that doesn't necessarily have to be state-owned right-of-way. There are instances where states have worked with local and regional jurisdictions. Also developing design standards for truck stops and identifying alternate truck parking locations, consideration given to, way areas, brake check areas, and safety pullouts. So the FHWA truck parking development handbooks offers design guidance to local jurisdictions and states in this area. Next slide. So there have been some, traditionally it wasn't necessarily clear for some of the major federal grants whether truck parking was covered. In some cases it wasn't explicitly allowed. That became a lot more explicit and available in recent years. And there have been some really significant truck parking federal grants awarded recently. These are just a couple of examples. The I-4 corridor in Florida was awarded $180 million grant, and then the I-90 rest area and sort of on the other end in Wisconsin, $8 million for a safety rest area. So there are a number of other truck parking wins, but these are just some examples. Next slide. And one that we worked on one in Missouri where the state we basically worked with them to identify and study 18 rest areas that were prioritized from previous work that had been done. And they had potential capacity for expansion. And the interesting thing and relevant for this, for New Jersey here, is that there was really a big focus on prioritizing them through benefit cost ratios. So really setting them up for success with potential grant opportunities. And the benefits included, and kind of the major ones were, they're sort of in order: driver time savings and safety benefits are really the big drivers of the BCA score, but also emissions and pavement damage, vehicle operating costs are calculated. In terms of from the cost side, we looked at both capital cost and incremental operations and maintenance costs, which we know is really a huge issue for states, the ongoing operation and maintenance cost. And sort of the interesting observation there is how variable those are, both between states and within states. In Missouri, different areas developed their operations and maintenance differently, and the cost varied very widely and drove some of the total ratios. So that was an interesting observation. Next slide. So then, because the public sector really can't, in many cases, solve this problem themselves, many states look at public-private partnerships, or calling them P3s. And obviously, the benefit there is you're transferring some of the funding costs or risk to the private sector. So there's a whole range of what that could look like. The most common one is really just where states would hire a private entity to operate a rest area and pay them a fee. But there's that can also range to whole sort of design, build, operate, maintain new facilities, having a public partner do that, say, on publicly owned right-of-way, or identifying publicly owned right-of-way next to an existing private commercial facility and entering into a cost-sharing agreement with the operator to expand their facility on the publicly owned right-of-way. And there's other opportunities for incentives and assisting them in financing. Also working with warehouse owners to facilitate parking on existing sites for staging and work access. That can also be done through an incentive system. Working with retail businesses and malls to identify and utilize underutilized parking spaces for trucks to park overnight. And then agreement with large existing parking facilities that are only used periodically or seasonally, such as the stadium. Next slide. So here's one case study. There's many others. This was in Colorado. A Love's Truck Stop wanted to purchase adjacent land and add spaces, but it would have required, and it did require, additional improvements to an interchange. And so the Colorado Department of Transportation entered into an agreement with the town of Bennett to fund the bridge improvements that were needed to allow that private truck stop to expand. Next slide. So the other thing that we found that's relevant is that each state is different in terms of what's allowed in terms of public-private partnerships. New Jersey Department of Treasury is tasked with coordinating the review and approval of P3 projects, and they have a screening tool for projects. There's also been some screening tools that have been developed, and we developed one in California and used it in Washington as well, that's specifically targeted to truck parking and looking at the range of different solutions and what's allowed in the state or what's of interest within the state, and helping jurisdictions to identify and prioritize the kind of partnerships they might want to enter into. Another related tool is a request for interest. That's been used in a few states, including Ohio and I believe Pennsylvania, where once a state identifies the kind of things they're interested in hearing back about, you can get feedback from the private sector on their level of interest and what they'll need to move forward. Next slide. So then a whole nother area is policy and regulation. And the FHWA Truck Parking Handbook provides some support here as well, because one big opportunity is modifying local parking ordinances to require more short-term parking staging requirements when industrial facilities are built. So that sort of prevents the continuation of the problem, just really requiring warehouses and other manufacturing facilities to accommodate sufficient parking on site, at least for staging. And then also another policy opportunity is modifying local truck parking ordinances to enable on-street parking in areas near first mile or last mile pickup and drop-offs. Often those are industrial commercial areas. That can be controversial, but that is existing right of way, essentially, that is often underutilized. Then another one that we saw used in Washington State, for example, was many cases local drivers can't even park their truck when they're resting, when they're off work. You know, local residential areas don't allow truck parking. And so at least in this one place in Washington, you can allow local drivers to register their trucks so that they can park for their rest time. And then finally, using zoning to help locate freight facilities closer to more efficient truck routes, or require industrial uses to build truck parking for staging, as we talked about. Next slide. So as I mentioned, the FHWA Truck Parking Handbook, it offers, in addition to, it has zoning language, sample language that can be used, as well as an estimation tool to allow local jurisdictions to calculate how much daily truck parking trips and parking should be required. And an example of where a local jurisdiction has done this in 2017, the township of Upper, I'm going to say it wrong, Nagunki, well, in Lehigh Valley, passed zoning, which requires one off-street truck parking space for every loading dock at a new warehouse or distribution facility. Again, trying to prevent future problems from occurring. And next slide. And Steve can correct my pronunciation and lead us through the institutional actions and outreach. Thanks.
I believe it's Upper Macungie. I know Brian. I see Brian Heights on from Lehigh Valley, so I know he's smiling at that one, I'm sure. So thanks, Bridget. So institutional actions are the last group, but are particularly important because they allow New Jersey DOT to develop internal practices that support or prioritize how and where truck parking projects or actions are ultimately implemented. There's a number of ways that this can be achieved. First, and an important element is having the state identify and designate a truck parking champion. That's your single point of contact that can represent the department on those projects that may come out of this effort or any other future additional truck parking projects. Secondary to this is the development of a truck parking committee, and that's internally at New Jersey DOT. You know, for any potential truck parking project, there's going to be a number of potential stakeholders or groups at the department, we want to ensure that we know who that group is before we undertake a given project. It's really having that is critical to the ultimate successful implementation of any given project. This goes beyond New Jersey as well. Certainly truck parking challenges don't end at the state line. The state should investigate any opportunities to create regional freight coalitions that are focused on multi-state policies or regulations, including things like real-time parking availability systems that you heard Shashank talk about earlier. And then finally, the state should consider opportunities for outreach to its partner agencies, serving as subject matter experts to help promote the benefits of truck parking, particularly for local decision makers that are looking to address truck parking challenges within their communities. It's something I know many of the county or municipal partners on this call are already grappling with. Next slide. So very quickly, I'll highlight one example of a statewide focus on truck parking. This comes from Illinois, where they had a competitive freight program that allowed for the funding of truck parking projects, through which multiple projects were advanced, including a statewide truck parking availability system, as well as the expansion of several rest areas located throughout the state, again, over that 6-year period through those 2 grant programs. Next slide. All right, so I'm going to very quickly summarize the strategies that you just heard us detail before I hand it back to Janice to talk about next steps. First, for data and technology, again, these projects are focused on 2 key themes. First, optimizing utilization of existing spaces, and then ultimately achieving increased driver productivity. However, challenges for these projects include that they are often complex. They do require substantial capital investment. Multi-state coordination is often required, particularly for more compact states like New Jersey, but we have seen these systems successfully deployed in places like the MASTO project that Shashank outlined earlier. Public capacity expansion projects do allow agencies like New Jersey DOT to control truck parking capacity, often leveraging existing state rights-of-way for development. Capacity expansions can be part of a larger project, including those that are focused on rest area modernization. And these projects can be funded through discretionary federal grant funding, as with the infra projects that Bridget mentioned in Florida and in Wisconsin. However, there are challenges. Capacity expansion projects are often expensive. They keep the burden of the solution on the public sector. And then finally, there just simply may not be available state-owned or publicly owned property in the locations where capacity is most needed. For P3 projects, benefits here include that it reduces public costs and shifts maintenance and right-of-way costs onto private developers. It shifts and balances the risk amongst multiple parties, and then provides increased opportunities for amenities that are not typically found at public rest areas. Challenges for these types of projects include difficulties in identifying those mutually beneficial terms, and that states often limit or prohibit P3 authority, although the New Jersey Department of Treasury does provide a P3 screening tool. For policy and regulation projects, these are often lower cost efforts, and in many cases, they are the most viable or only viable option in a given area based on resources. Challenges with these efforts are first that coordination with one or multiple local jurisdictions is often required, and that public support for truck parking projects is often difficult to achieve, though Bridget did note that there have been municipalities within the region, such as the one she talked about in Upper Macungie, that have worked to address truck parking through zoning. And then finally, for institutional actions and outreach, having a truck parking champion will provide that singular focus on priorities and actions. Agency or public outreach can often help to offset or address public concerns or just simply build support. And then finally, these projects are often lower cost, but can be highly impactful. Challenges with these efforts are similar to those you just heard for policy and regulations. Again, they require coordination with multiple local agencies or jurisdictions, including those that may not support truck parking projects. And then finally, visible successes may not happen quickly. And that's difficult when one of the main goals of this effort is certainly to identify those visible and tangible projects that can help build momentum for future additional projects throughout the city. Next slide. All right, with that, I'm going to hand it back to Janice to talk through our next steps.
Great, thank you, Steve. So as you can see, there's a lot of things we could do. So we want to logically figure out what possible next steps would be. So we're going to designate the Office of Freight Planning as the New Jersey DOT champion. And we're going to establish an internal committee and implement truck parking recommendations. Then we're also going to look at identifying specific public capacity expansion opportunities in phase 2. That's our next section of truck parking. And we're going to gather all the lessons learned from the New Jersey DOT TPIMS pilot. I'm going to develop implementation of a plan to expand it statewide, pursue opportunities for maybe a multi-state parking availability system. And building on the FHWA handbook, we're going to develop a New Jersey specific truck parking guidance for jurisdictions. We can work on doing that, which might include zoning, language, and design standards. We're going to screen P3 options as part of phase 2 and issue an RFI to gather private sector feedback on what they think and what's going on. And then also we can reach out to local agencies and the public to raise awareness of truck parking needs and benefits that support the upcoming projects. So with those being said, I guess we can go on to questions, which would be the next slide, and we'll go from there. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you very much. That was very interesting. So Jacob, I know you're monitoring chat. I was looking at it. I don't see any questions in the chat box.
I don't either.
I have one question, if I may. So currently, between public and private, do you have a percentage of parking, how that's divided between public and private facilities current day?
I don't have it offhand right now, but I believe in our inventory we do have that. So that's something we can get back to you on that.
Hey, Shashank, can you hear me? This is Stephanie Finch from the project team as well. We've got an estimated 202,886 spaces, 24 public facilities, 52 private facilities, and that represents private locations comprising about 70% of the total inventory in the state, and public with about 30% of the inventory.
All right, and then on a follow-up on the private, this is all new information for me, very interesting. I assume there's a fee for the trucker to be parking at a private facility versus a public one. Is that correct?
What typically, and this is part of the problem with resolving the issue, is most private truck stops are funding, get their money from fuel or food, other things that they sell to the truck drivers, and not from the parking. There are some instances where truck drivers pay for reservations as spaces has become more at a premium. So it makes it difficult to resolve the issue because there's not really an incentive for the private sector for these private truck stops to provide more parking. They just need to provide enough to attract truck drivers to stop to fuel up and grab a bite to eat, use some of their other facilities. So that's the typical setup, although again, with the dearth of parking spots, there's some different formats being developed where they have fewer amenities and do pay a small fee for parking, for example, in some cases.
Got you. Thank you. That's all I had. I think Jacob, something popped up in the
yes. Yeah, so we have a question. What considerations toward 24/7 warehouse operations could we examine to alleviate some of this parking stress?
Well, I can jump in on that one too. There's a lot of considerations for when you're opening, say, for example, require businesses to stay open all night, right? So it's an additional cost to them. that is something that has been looked at in some jurisdictions. New York City had a well-known pilot for overnight operations such as that. There are certain industries that are more inclined to do it if they're already open at night, for example, restaurants and that kind of thing, or if they have trusted partners and can set up other facilities. But generally what's been found is that the incentives that are used in pilots are sort of needed to keep things going, again, unless you're looking at certain industries or certain relationships. So it you know, it's a cost on the private sector to ask them to stay open all night.
All right. Not seeing other questions. I actually have a couple. I guess the first one, I'm assuming WSP, I'm assuming you guys have done similar work around the country. Can you talk a little bit about how New Jersey compares to other parts of the US in terms of this issue?
Yeah, it's the worst one we've seen. I'll just say, and we have done, well, I've done 12 studies around the country, something like that. You know, it makes sense, right? It's an urbanized state relatively near the major metropolitan area. So there's just not as much availability, and there's a huge, you know, port. There's a lot of activity also in Pennsylvania for freight. So it is one of the worst we've seen. So for example, some of the survey findings, you know, that most truck drivers were stopping 1 to 2 hours early. I mean, and when you're a truck driver, time is money, and any business time is money, but for truck drivers particularly, and that was a large amount of sort of wasted time, lost hours, because they need to stop early in order to get a parking spot. That was just one example. And then the delay, the numbers that Shashank talked about in terms of the detours being most truck drivers going at least 5 miles out of their way, and up to 25 miles an hour, 25 miles out of the way just to secure a parking spot. And just think about that on a daily basis. Similar problems even for the staging, a little bit less severe, but yeah, it's pretty bad.
And does it also apply to the other side, to the solution side, that it's also most challenging where we are?
We haven't, I mean, I guess I'd say that I assume that there is less available property to develop, right? Yeah. And it's more expensive. So we haven't gotten as in detail in phase 2. We will get into more detail on the solution side.
Yeah, I would think, you know, we definitely have some challenges as far as space and traffic that other states, you know, that are more rural or have more available land. So that's going to be a challenge. So that's why we're looking at each individual situation and trying to figure out which of those solutions would make most sense with that area.
Makes sense. I think Ken Wadeen raised his hand before Kamal asked this question. So Ken, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I had a question for the group concerning in other parts of the country, how are the, let's say, you know, especially public sector, able to overcome at the local level the kind of the NIMBY, not in my backyard, or, you know, a lot of misconceptions on you know, held by either the public and or municipal governments as to, you know, putting a truck stop or putting a, you know, a truck parking in a location. I've heard in years past New Jersey that anytime one's been proposed, everyone comes out of the woodwork. We don't want it, you know, even though they may be parking in their area anyway, you know, due to noise or light pollution. I'm just curious if anyone has come up with a methodology where they've been more successful and able to overcome some of the NIMBY kind of, you know, not in my backyard. Thank you.
Yeah, I can jump in on that as well. That is one of the biggest problems in solving this issue, especially when you have states where there's local control And, you know, it sometimes prevents even public agencies and publicly owned land from developing solutions. So I think that still remains to be resolved. It is a lot of coordination work with folks such as yourselves, actually, in terms of educating about the benefits of resolving the problem, because a lot of times I think local jurisdictions will think that, you know, we won't, if we provide the truck parking, it's going to draw problems, right? It's going to attract more truck drivers. But in reality, and it's similar with freight routes, people have that misconception that it's drawing the trucks there, but the trucks are already going there. They're going to park in undesignated facilities. There's very severe impacts from that. And so we have encountered some recognition of that in some of the more impacted states, such as California.
Thank
All
you.
right. Now, question from Kamal. How does the Port of Newark and Elizabeth deal with the amount of demand and activity related to truck traffic and parking?
Stephanie, do you have some insight on that?
So we did, I think, as Shashank discussed in the presentation, conduct 2 surveys, one for long haul trucking that's more going through the state, and then one for short haul trucking, and that's more related to drayage trucks associated with for both the you know, the northern New Jersey ports and southern New Jersey locations. You know, we want to capture that activity. How the ports themselves deal with the traffic, I might turn that over to Stefan or someone from the Port Authority, and I don't want to speak for them on how they manage it, but we did identify that it was a significant problem, and there's always been, well, maybe not always is not the right word, but there's for a long time been a kind of a push-pull of the port is growing, the port is expanding activity, what can be asked of destination warehouses for their hours of operations, which then directly impacts communities. And that's both in New Jersey and in Pennsylvania with the warehousing out there. So it's a push-pull for economic activity and community. So I don't know if Stefan or someone wants to also speak to that.
Stefan actually raised his hand. I'm wondering if that's why.
Oh, good.
I do have a question, but I'll just kind of respond to that, and then I'll ask my question. Hopefully I can satisfy the question that was being asked as well. I think, you know, one of the things that is kind of misunderstood is that nobody wants to be waiting in a queue line to get into the terminals. None of the truckers want to be there waiting. A lot of the staging that they're doing, and that's really what it is, staging is it's either a requirement that they're hitting their hours of service, or they're parked because they're trying to get in at their when the terminal opens, or they may have an appointment and they may be early for. So that's what a lot of the trucking demand that we may see around the ports is really fueled by. There's also a lot of warehousing that's in and around, and both embedded within the ports, and then also surrounding the ports, and also the airport as well. So I think it's also good to note that areas off port are also you know, impacting those truck parking sort of challenges around the port as well, because there might be restrictions as to how soon a truck driver can actually come to the facility. They may not be allowed to enter the facility until, you know, 20 or 30 minutes before the facility has an appointment time for them. If they miss that slot, they might have to now sit and wait until a new slot opens up for them. So there's a lot of complications for that. I think, you know, it's typically there isn't a lot of what I would call long-term truck parking at the facilities. You know, if anything, it's an hour or so that most people are usually usually queuing up or waiting to get in. There are some longer haul truckers that are coming from places like Canada and other places that are trying to get to the port that may be there earlier because they've either hit their hours of service and they're waiting, or they're also trying to or they've gotten there and it's so early that the terminal hasn't opened yet. Hopefully that answers the question. I did want to ask just, I've seen over the past couple years of kind of looking at this and trying to help work with both New York State, New York City, and New Jersey on these issues. My question I did have was there any bit of understanding what the economic impact of each truck parking spot, what the economic benefit to the local community was? I know that I've seen in a couple places that for every time there's a truck parking location that opens up, that there's a certain amount of economic benefit to that community that also comes along with that. And I think that that's often one of those things that's overlooked in these NIMBY discussions. But I'd love to hear if anybody in the group did any background on that.
Well, I would say for the BCA analysis that we've done, it's focused more on following the federal guidance, which I believe is more the direct costs and impacts that we talked about, from crashes and detours. But Shashank might have some insight into, it's a very good point, into some of the more sort of the indirect economic benefits, or if that's been studied much in the literature, we could always get back to you.
So Bridget, I haven't seen specifically like per space economic benefits. I think we did an aggregate for the New Jersey Freight Plan, an aggregate contribution of freight to New Jersey's economy, as well as maybe to specific localities. I believe we did that for the New Jersey Freight Plan. That is an interesting question. It's something we can get back to you on, Stefan. But yeah, as Bridget mentioned, our analysis was more focused on direct benefits and costs. So not economic impact, as we followed USDOT federal guidance, and that explicitly tells you can't use economic impact analyses. So, but that is something that's an interesting question, and we should actually look into that too, Bridget.
Yeah, well, one of the things I want to say, as far as education, when we start going around trying to make sure that the communities and people understand what the benefits are, right? As how much, what the economy is based on the trucks, and how it interacts with their community, and why, the positives, not only the negatives, but the positives. So that's part of the conversation. I think when we start going around as far as outreach and awareness and education as to what the trucking industry is and what it does, and not so much the, trying to get away from the negatives. So it's definitely, because we know what the what it does for the state economy. So if we break it down a little bit more, like you mentioned and you suggested, would probably be a positive thing to do.
All right. And I'll just add, Stefan, that back when we did our truck parking study many years ago, we actually looked at a potential site on Doremus Avenue and kind of figured out, the economic benefits, the ratables of locating a truck parking facility with all the, kind of amenities and so on that site, and did kind of the economic benefits of it. So we then divided per truck, but that's probably a straightforward calculation. But anyway, I will now move to the final question, and Ryan's been waiting patiently. So Ryan.
Thank you. I just wanted to see if the DOT and if WSP has seen it elsewhere outside of the state, in terms of making considerations for utilizing clover leaves and interchange green spaces within interchanges to be retrofitted to allow and accommodate for truck parking or truck facilities. I don't know if it's been done in other states. Well, for example, and we have pretty large interchange in Warren County at 22, 173, and 78. I know some of it's used for stormwater management, but within the cloverleaf itself, there seems to be some availability for to be utilized for something like this. I wonder, what your thoughts are, if the DOT is making those considerations, and if it's been successful or implemented or contemplated elsewhere in the United States.
Yeah, it has been looked at. We've looked at a number of locations. Sometimes it gets, you need to make sure you can run up against rules of just spacing between, access points and that kind of thing. It really depends on the amount of space that's available and how it's configured. But the other states have also looked at that, and I believe for sure some have built them. I don't have an example off the top of my head, but it's definitely a consideration. And Shashank,
there is one example that I know, Bridget. It's in Nebraska. I think the town is called Big Springs, and I believe they had exactly this cloverleaf. I think it was interchange. It was an interchange on I-80, where they built about 50 truck parking spaces on this cloverleaf. So that's something that we can look into a little bit more. But I think it's Big Springs, Nebraska. So Nebraska DOT that did this. So I believe there may have been other examples, but this is the one that comes to my mind at the moment.
All right. Thank you. Thank you all for the very interesting presentation and for all the good work. And Commissioner, I'll turn it over to you.
All right. Yeah. Once again, I want to thank you all. I certainly have seen the trucks parked along the 78 corridor heading into Pennsylvania all the time. It was even an article on the Star Ledger one time years ago. But interesting topic. Never really thought about it. I'm glad that you're all working on it and see the impact that it has.